Frieren. Beyond Journey's End. Prequel Stories. Translated by Gadgetized Panda Translations. Audiobook by Masquerade at Masquerade Audiobooks. Chapter 1. Fern. Days of Peace. Fern feels the warmth of the sun on her face. As she lifts her heavy eyelids, the dazzling morning sun shines in. She gets up from the bed and stretches with a yawn. Dust motes dance and glimmer, reflecting the sunlight. With a sleepy mind, she thinks, looks like a good day for laundry. It's been a while since Fern started living in this house. At first, the hardness of the bed made it hard for her to fall asleep, but now she can sleep soundly through the night. She steps out into the hallway and peeks into the living room and kitchen. No one's around. Heiter must still be sleeping. She'll go fetch some water, she thinks. Grabbing a bucket, she heads outside. The gentle sunlight warms her skin. The chirping of birds is pleasant to her ears. This area is mostly free of monsters, so it's very peaceful. Walking a bit into the forest, she reaches the river. Peering into the river's surface, she sees a familiar face. Purple hair cut at the shoulders, sleepy-looking eyes. Like scooping up the reflection on the rippling water, she dips the bucket to fill it with water. Heave-ho! The bucket handle digs into her fingers. The water-filled bucket is heavy enough to almost slip off her shoulder. It's all she can do to make it back home, her body swaying side to side as water sloshes out. Somehow, she makes it back to the house. Entering the kitchen, Heiter just comes out of the bedroom, leaning on his cane and walking slowly. Freshly woken up, his white hair is tousled. Noticing her, Heiter gives Fern a warm, wrinkle-cheeked smile. "Good morning, Fern." "Good morning, Master Heiter." She sets the bucket down with a thud, spilling more water. But Heiter doesn't make any displeased expression. His gentle smile remains as he reaches out to gently pat her head. His bony, withered hand moves carefully, not mussing her hair. It tickles her heart. "Thank you for fetching the water. It must have been heavy." "It was nothing. You're so capable. Shall we wash your face now?" Heiter uses magic to levitate the bucket, and they head to the washroom together. Fern was a war orphan. With no family left after the war, she had nowhere to go, drifting aimlessly, almost resigned to death. It was then that Heiter approached her. It would be a shame to die now, he had said. And so she was taken in by Heiter. Heiter provided her with warm meals and a clean bed. He also taught her the skills to live independently. Heiter's kindness carefully filled the gaping hole in her heart left by the loss of her family. Being with Master Heiter puts Fern at ease. At some point, she came to want to be of help to him. Section. "Do you see that biggest rock over there?" Heiter points with the hand not holding his cane to a rock in the distance, across a cliff. Feeling anxious about the height, Fern nods. The rock stands out, slightly above them on the other side of the cliff, like a landmark. If you could shoot a spell and hit that rock, Fern, you would be considered an adult. An adult, who? Trying to avoid looking down the cliff, she readies her staff. This is not Heiter's walking cane, but a staff for casting magic. One he has passed down to her. It's bigger than her own height, and at first it was difficult for her to even hold. But now it fits her hand naturally. She focuses on the target rock. A beam of light shoots from the staff's tip, but it quickly loses momentum and dissipates, blown away by the wind. It doesn't even reach halfway to the rock. She slumps her shoulders. "For your first try, that was quite good," Heiter says, placing a hand on her head. "Keep practicing, and I'm sure you'll be able to hit it." "Yes." "All right, let's get to today's training, then." Their daily practice begins. In the early days of learning magic, Fern was mostly taught minor household spells. But gradually, she's been learning more battle-oriented magic. Now, the majority of her training time is spent on spells for self-defense. Heiter is knowledgeable about magic, but he is not a mage. He is a priest. One who can heal wounds and dispel curses. So he has never been particularly skilled at offensive magic. But Fern has no complaints about Heiter's teaching methods, and she greatly respects him. "Master Heiter, how can I make my spells travel farther?" "The basics are there, so for now it's just a matter of repetition. Just keep practicing, and the range will improve. Understood. Fern does as he instructed. As Fern kept repeating the same thing, she gradually got a grasp of it. She sharpened her magical power and fired the magic straight without any deviation, more accurately and powerfully. Gradually, the range of her magic extended. By the time her magical power was depleted, the magic could reach almost halfway to the farthest rock. "You're progressing quickly," Heiter said admiringly. "Fern has the potential to become a mage. I'm sure you'll become a great mage in the future." "I see." Fern's reply was subdued, but she was quite pleased inside. Whenever Heiter complimented her, she felt a warm, fuzzy feeling deep within. "I'll work even harder on my training." "That's a good attitude. But don't overdo it, okay? You have all the time in the world." After a break to recover her magical power, Fern trained until dusk. The height of the cliff that had once frightened her no longer fazed her at all in the end. Fern and Heiter started on their way back. They walked along the dim forest path, the two of them. Fern was tired from using so much magic that day. Cough, cough. Suddenly, Heiter started coughing. Fern looked up at Heiter walking beside her. "Are you all right?" "Ah, sorry about that." "I'm fine. It's probably because the air has gotten colder." Heiter smiled reassuringly at her, but Fern's mood was not calm. Heiter's health was not good. He always said he was fine, but there had been times when he suddenly started coughing or leaned against a wall, looking unsteady. His appetite had also been decreasing lately. It was not an illness, just the effects of age. That's why there was no cure. Fern just had to accept it. "You have all the time in the world." Fern remembered Heiter's words. It might be true for her, but she couldn't help but think, just how much time does Heiter have left? The thought made her feel a little scared. When they arrived home, Fern started preparing dinner. Lately, she had been the one doing the cooking since Heiter's body had been getting weaker. She started cooking with the desire to repay him, but she found that she actually enjoyed it more than she expected. It's not that she particularly loved cooking, but rather that she seemed to enjoy taking care of others. Once the cooking was done, they sat at the same table, facing each other to eat. "Master Heiter, please don't leave the broccoli behind," Fern said. As she said that, Heiter suddenly stopped his hand. On his plate, the broccoli was pushed to the side. "You know, Fern, broccoli doesn't have much nutrition, so it's fine not to eat it." "You're lying, aren't you? So you saw through it." Occasionally, Fern couldn't help but wonder if this man really was a priest. "Why do you keep telling such obvious lies?" "That's just how adults are. It's only you, Master Heiter. You shouldn't have food preferences. Please eat it." "You've become quite bold, Fern." Heiter gave in and put the broccoli in his mouth, looking a bit dejected as he chewed it. Fern started thinking that maybe she should find a more delicious way to cook it next time. A mother-like worry. After finishing the meal, Heiter started boiling water. The heat from the magical flame he created made the kettle lid rattle. "Would you like a hot milk, Fern?" "Yes." "Ah, no, I'd like the same as you, Master Heiter." "The same as me?" "All right, but will it suit your taste?" "It's fine." With that, Heiter quickly poured out 2 cups of coffee. The aroma of the roasted beans filled the room. "Here you go." A mug filled to the brim with the dark liquid was placed in front of Fern. Careful not to burn her tongue, she gently blew on it and took a sip. "It's bitter." She couldn't help but scrunch up her face. "Haha, it seems a bit too strong for you, Fern." Heiter laughed amusedly. Feeling a bit annoyed, Fern puffed out her cheeks. She wanted to grow up quickly and imitate Heiter, but it seemed she had failed. Simply following the form doesn't mean anything. "Let me add some sugar and milk. That way, you'll be able to drink it." "Understood." Fern handed the mug back to Heiter. It's not that she disliked being treated like a child. She just wanted Heiter to recognize her as an adult as soon as possible. That way, she wouldn't have to worry him unnecessarily. The coffee kept her awake that night. Her eyes were wide open, and she tossed and turned in bed. But no matter how much she tried, she couldn't fall asleep. So she got up from the bed. Carrying a lantern, she rummaged through the bookshelf. Magical history, herbology, barrier techniques. Heiter had left them here, saying they'd be educational. But the content was all too dense, and she didn't feel like reading any of them. Something warm. Maybe a hot milk would help her sleep, Fern thought. With that in mind, she took a lantern and made her way out into the hallway. As she made her way toward the kitchen, she noticed a light emanating from Heiter's room. It seemed he was still awake. Curiosity piqued. Fern approached the slightly ajar door and peeked inside. There sat Heiter at his desk, engrossed in a book. His rounded shoulders shifted as he turned the pages. Not wanting to just linger in the doorway, Fern stepped into the room. Heiter swiveled around in his chair to face her. "Oh, you're still awake. I couldn't sleep." Fern placed the lantern on the shelf and moved closer to Heiter. "What were you reading?" "The Grimoire of Erwig the Sage." Heiter displayed the book he had been poring over to Fern. Fern had anticipated dense text but was surprised to find numerous illustrations filling the pages. However, she couldn't decipher their meaning. They appeared as intricate diagrams or peculiar smudges. "Is this a picture book?" "No, it's a cipher. The illustrations obscure the content's meaning. The actual text isn't crucial. I was simply trying to decipher it to pass the time." With a thud, Heiter closed the book. "Anyway, if you're having trouble sleeping, how about I tell you an adventure story instead?" "Yes, please." Fern replied eagerly, settling onto Heiter's bed. Heiter, once a revered priest in the hero party that vanquished the Demon King, was known for his captivating tales. "Just fond memories, really," Heiter would always remark. Yet, as he recounted his adventures, he exuded vitality and joy, inspiring Fern to yearn for her own journeys. "So, we reached the dungeon's depths. We were battered and hadn't eaten properly in a week. And what do you think was in the treasure chest? Precious metals and jewels, perhaps? A grimoire for polishing your nails to a shine. We tried it despite our exhaustion, and as we left the dungeon, our nails sparkled." Fern stifled a laugh. Though a whimsical anecdote, it was far from the typical tale of demon slayers. Yet, it entertained nonetheless. "Please, share more of your adventures." "Yes, of course," Heiter said in a quiet voice, as if telling a fairy tale. He recounted tales of nearly being executed by the king, of defeating a dragon for the first time, of narrowly avoiding a party wipe. Fern could have listened forever, but an irresistible sleepiness overcame her, and her head started to droop. She tried to fight it, but her head kept nodding. Unable to stay upright, Fern laid down on the bed. That way she could keep listening to Heiter's stories. But soon her eyelids felt unbearably heavy, and, "Good night, Fern." And that was the last thing she remembered. Upon awakening, Fern found herself in her own bed, bathed in morning sunlight. It seemed she had dozed off listening to Heiter's tales, and he had carried her to bed. Embarrassment washed over her groggy mind. At this rate, she'd never become a true adult. Fern lightly slapped her cheeks. She resolved to redouble her efforts in training today. Section. After lunch, a knock sounded at the front door. As Fern moved to answer it, Heiter intercepted. "I'll get it," he said, rising. He swung open the door to reveal a bent old woman carrying a basket. Spotting Heiter, she gasped, covering her mouth in astonishment. "You haven't changed a bit." Grasping Heiter's hand, the woman effusively thanked him. This wasn't an uncommon occurrence. The heroes had aided many during their travels, and sometimes those they'd rescued would return years later to express their gratitude. While it didn't directly involve Fern, witnessing Heiter's revered status filled her with pride. "Let's not linger out here," Heiter suggested, leading the old woman inside. Fern brewed tea, recalling it as a customary gesture of hospitality Heiter had taught her. It had become second nature to her. As she carried the cups to the table where Heiter and the woman sat, the old woman exclaimed, "Oh my, thank you kindly, dear. What a lovely young lady. Is she your granddaughter?" "No, I'm Master Heiter's." Fern's words trailed off. What exactly was she to Heiter? To her, he was a savior, a mentor, a surrogate parent. Well then, Fern wondered how Heiter felt about her. As Fern was lost in thought, Heiter offered to help. "She is Fern, and she is like my top disciple, so to speak, Heiter said. Ah, I see. So Fern is also a priest? Asked the person speaking with Heiter. No, it's not like that. She has the talent to become a mage. I see. Suddenly, the old woman grabbed Fern's hand and looked straight at her. I'm sure you'll become a great mage. The sudden closeness surprised Fern, so she gave a quick thank you and hurried back to the kitchen. Alone, Heiter's words echoed in Fern's mind. My top disciple, so to speak. So, is Fern Heiter's top disciple? It's a strange feeling, hard to understand. Heiter himself seemed unsure, so Fern couldn't take it at face value. Still, it didn't make her feel bad. Soon, the sound of the front door opening was heard. The old woman must be back. Heiter came into the kitchen, carrying the empty cup. The tea was delicious. Thank you. It was nothing special. Heiter placed the cup in the sink, then called Fern with a solemn tone. Fern braced herself, wondering what was happening. You have the talent to become a mage, Heiter said. Fern had heard those words before, both just now and earlier. But as a priest, I can only teach you so much. If you ever meet a better mage, don't hesitate to seek their guidance. Fern wondered why Heiter was suddenly saying this. Nodding hesitantly, Fern was met with Heiter's usual gentle smile. Summer had arrived. The soft spring sunlight was replaced by the relentless glare of the sun, scorching Fern's skin. Standing on the tallest rock, she felt occasional cool breezes that soothed her sweaty skin, causing her to carelessly push up her sleeves. Of course, the training continued, rain or wind, no matter how hot. But the heat seemed to take a toll on the elderly Heiter, and lately, Fern had been training alone. The exercises were mostly repetitive, so Fern didn't mind Heiter's absence. In fact, she hoped he could rest at home, sparing his body. Fern focused her magic on the tallest rock. A flash of light shot through the air. She had improved, able to cast the spell farther than before. But the progress had slowed down lately. How many more years would it take to reach the rock? I need to work harder. Gripping her staff, Fern immersed herself in the training. When her magic power started to wane, she decided to take a break in the shade. Placing her staff beside her, she leaned against the tree trunk. As she idly waited for her magic to recover, a sound came from above. Droplets fell on the leaves. The dripping grew louder, and in the next moment, a thunderous roar filled the air, like countless buckets being overturned. A sudden downpour. Sheltered by the tree, Fern stayed dry. The sky had become blanketed in thick clouds. Hugging her knees, Fern decided to wait for the rain to stop. Thunderstorms usually don't last long. The scent of damp soil rose from the ground. The birdsong had ceased, replaced by the croaking chorus of frogs. The wind carried a cool, moist touch. A yawn escaped Fern. Sleepiness was setting in. There was still time before sunset. A short nap should be fine. By the time she woke up, the rain would have passed. With that thought, Fern quietly closed her eyes. Section. Upon waking, the sky was painted in a vibrant crimson sunset. I overslept. Fern stood up and stretched. Her magic had recovered, but she had lost most of the training time. Napping halfway through the day was not a good idea, she realized. Determined to train until nightfall, Fern looked down at her feet. Her staff was gone. She scanned the area, but it was nowhere to be seen. Fern felt the blood drain from her face. She had lost the precious staff given to her by Heiter. Panicking slightly, she searched desperately. Then, in the direction of the forest, she spotted a trail that seemed to have dragged something. The trail looked like it was left by the staff. If the ground hadn't been so muddy after the rain, Fern might not have noticed it. Following the trail, Fern ventured into the forest. The air was dense with the scent of wood, and puddles dotted the ground. Ah, there was the staff. Fern felt relieved to have found it so close, but her relief was short-lived. A large, rodent-like creature was dragging the staff, likely intending to use it for its nest. If left unchecked, the staff would be chewed and broken. Give it back, please. Fern ran to the nest and grabbed the stick with both hands. The rodent, puffed up in defiance, emitting a menacing hiss. Despite feeling a twinge of intimidation, Fern refused to yield, her grip tightening on the staff. The slippery ground made it a struggle to maintain her hold. Undeterred, Fern persisted, pulling with all her might until the staff slipped from the rodent's grasp. As the staff slipped away, Fern's gaze shifted upwards. In that fleeting moment, she caught sight of a shooting star, before landing with a wet splat on the muddy ground. The defeated rodent scurried away, leaving Fern in a muddy heap. So that's how you ended up all muddy. It's not funny. Heiter chuckled warmly over dinner. Though Fern had successfully retrieved the staff, the task of cleaning it and her clothes proved to be quite the ordeal. The mud stubbornly clung to her garments, presenting a challenge. If only there were a magical spell to cleanse them thoroughly, Fern would have eagerly embraced it. Well, at least you got it back. But the staff has bite marks now. Those can be easily repaired. An idea suddenly sparked in Heiter's mind. Why don't we head into town? We can have the staff fixed and indulge in a bit of shopping while we're at it. Is it really okay to go out? What about my training? A little break won't hurt. Besides, you deserve some time to relax. Reluctant to dampen Heiter's enthusiasm, Fern relented. All right, she agreed. The following day, Fern and Heiter arranged for a carriage and set off for town. It had been some time since Fern last visited the bustling town. Street vendors hawked their wares, filling the air with their calls. At the tavern's outdoor terrace, patrons enjoyed lively conversations over drinks. The hustle and bustle of the town made Fern slightly uneasy. Their first stop was the repair shop, where the staff would undergo restoration. Assured that the damage could be rectified within a day, they decided to explore the town in the meantime. Strolling at a leisurely pace, Fern observed the various stalls lining the streets. Sparkling jewelry, quaint trinkets, and potions of varying quality caught her eye, making browsing a delightful experience. Fern paused, her attention caught by a vibrant red ribbon displayed at a vendor's stall. Do you like it? Heiter inquired. I shouldn't spend frivolously. You're still young, kids don't need to think about that. Let me get it for you. After a brief negotiation with the vendor, Heiter purchased the ribbon with a few copper coins. Kneeling beside Fern, he carefully tied it into her hair. A nearby vendor offered a mirror, allowing Fern to admire her reflection. The sight of the crimson ribbon adorning her hair brought a smile to her face. It suits you, Heiter remarked. Just like when Heiter patted her head, Fern felt a ticklish sensation in my heart. After that, they had a meal at a restaurant. Fern ordered a hamburger, while Heiter had a Rufo omelette. Apparently a hero's favorite dish. As he ate, Heiter squinted his eyes, seeming to reminisce. Master Heiter, what's your favorite food? Mine? That's a tough one. As for drinks, I'd say it's all about alcohol. Is that so? Fern didn't know that. She doesn't think she have ever seen Heiter drinking. No, it may have happened only once. Fern feel like Heiter had a bottle of wine when he reached out to Fern, who was about to die, for help. Do you still drink? I've given it up. Though they say alcohol is a cure-all. Perhaps an occasional indulgence wouldn't hurt. Heiter replied, a hint of wistfulness in his voice. Aware of the potential health risks associated with alcohol, Fern urged caution. Why don't you have some? I want you to stay healthy, Master Heiter. Heiter chuckled softly, his expression tinged with amusement. No, I think I'll pass. I can always have a drink if I want. I see. After their meal, they ventured to a clothing store to update Fern's wardrobe. With Fern going through a growth spurt, Heiter suggested replenishing her wardrobe regularly. Indeed, Fern had noticed her clothes becoming snug. They perused several stores, purchasing a variety of autumn attire. Their shopping expedition concluded, they returned to the repair shop. To Fern's delight, the staff had been restored to its former glory by the skilled craftsman. The damage had vanished, and its magical properties had even improved. This brought Fern more joy than the ribbon Heiter had gifted her. As they journeyed home in the carriage, Fern found herself overcome with drowsiness. Leaning against Heiter's shoulder, she drifted off to sleep, the gentle rocking of the carriage lulling her into a peaceful slumber. It had been a good day. The next day, Heiter collapsed. Section. Ha ha ha, it seems I've caught a cold in the town, Heiter said, lying in bed with a damp towel on his forehead. This is no laughing matter. Heiter had collapsed that morning. He had quickly tried to get up, but he had a terrible fever. As an experienced priest, if Heiter said it was a cold, it was likely a cold. But Fern was still worried. Even a simple cold must be quite harsh for the elderly Heiter. Otherwise, she wouldn't have collapsed like that. I'm fine, really. How about your training for today? Normally, Heiter would have already started their training by now. Leaving Heiter behind to go train made Fern uneasy, but there's not much Fern can do here other than change the towel. Reluctantly, Fern left Heiter's room and went outside to start the training. The tasks were no different than usual, aiming at the largest boulder and casting spells. But the spell's range was shorter than before. Every time Fern used magic, the power and speed decreased. Worried about Heiter, Fern couldn't concentrate. No matter how hard she tried to push the anxiety out of her mind, it didn't work. The more she tried to forget, the more distracting thoughts filled her head. In the end, Fern couldn't focus at all that day. The next day was the same. Heiter's condition didn't improve much. Even 3 days after catching the cold, his fever hadn't gone down. At night, Fern could hear Heiter's coughing through the wall, which pained her heart. The cold of an elderly person tends to linger. It's quite common, Heiter said. But Fern wasn't sure if she could believe those words. Then, on the 4th day after Heiter's collapse, Fern made a decision. Master Heiter, I'll be going for my training. Yes, do your best today as well. As Fern left the house, she headed in a different direction from the cliff where the large boulder was. Last night, Fern had read a book on medicinal herbs, hoping to find a way to help Heiter. Overwhelmed by the amount of text, she managed to find that there were herbs in this region that were effective against colds. They seemed to grow abundantly in the high-altitude areas. There was a mountain nearby. If Fern went there in the morning, she should be able to find the herbs and return before sunset. So, Fern decided to skip the training and search for the herbs instead. This would mean breaking Heiter's rule about not going too far, but if Fern came back with the herbs, Heiter would surely overlook it. Carrying her staff, Fern entered the forest, heading east towards the mountain. She reached the trailhead without any trouble. As she climbed the mountain path, the uphill slope gradually drained her strength. Sweat poured down her chin, and the hot summer sun made her staff feel unbearably heavy. Taking breaks in between, Fern continued up the slope until she reached the middle of the mountain. She decided to have lunch here. Fern had told Heiter that she would be eating lunch outside today, so there wouldn't be any suspicion, as they already had separate meals to prevent the cold from spreading. Munching on bread, Fern sat down on a rock. The scenery, though not a towering peak, was beautiful. Looking down, Fern spotted the medicinal herb she had been searching for on the slope. A slender grass with small yellow flowers. What luck, to find it so quickly. Leaving her belongings, Fern carefully descended the slope, trying not to slip as the gravel rolled underfoot, increasing the tension. She managed to reach the herbs, and plucked 4 or 5 stems, putting them in her pocket. With her objective accomplished, Fern climbed back up. If only she could use a levitation spell, it would be so much easier. Returning to where she left her things, Fern started heading down the mountain. All that was left was the journey home. About an hour after descending the mountain. Where am I? I'm lost. Fern had become lost in the forest. She regretted not paying more attention to the return route. Going up had been easy, with the mountain as a clear landmark. But walking straight through the featureless forest proved much more difficult than she had anticipated. The sun was still high. In any case, she had to keep walking. Fern needed to get back before sunset, or Heiter would start worrying. Since she had gone east on the way up, the return should be west. Roughly gauging the direction from the sun's position, Fern started walking. The scenery remained unchanged. Her feet ached from the constant walking since morning. Suddenly, Fern's staff hit something. Immediately, something fell nearby. Fern stopped and looked back, only to see a beehive. Bzzzzz. The terrifying buzzing sound filled the air as bees swarmed out of the hive. Fern panicked and ran away. Being stung would be disastrous. Forgetting the pain in her feet, she desperately fled. After running for a while, Fern thought she was safe, but in that moment, her foot caught on a tree root, and she tumbled down in a spectacular fall. "Ooh!" Fern muttered as she struck the ground forcefully, feeling the impact reverberate through her body. The weeds brushed against her nose as she slowly pushed herself up, peeling her body away from the earth. Looking down, she noticed her scraped knees, with a little blood seeping out, a testament to her recent fall. The double punch of pain and exhaustion threatened to break her spirit. "I have to stay strong," she reminded herself, mustering her resolve to stand up. Fern began walking again. The rest of the journey was rough. She banged her head on branches, got her clothes snagged in the bushes, and tripped over rocks, stumbling to the ground. It seemed misfortune was calling out to more misfortune, but even so, she felt incredibly unlucky. Still, she had managed to obtain the medicinal herbs. As long as she could deliver them to Heiter, the hardship would be worth it. With that sole purpose in mind, Fern kept moving her feet. Finally, as the day was fading and the moon was rising, she emerged onto a familiar path. She had passed well past sunset, and it was growing dark. But she had made it this far. Just a little further and she would be home. Then she could give these herbs to Heiter. These herbs. Her hand rummaging in her pocket came up empty. No matter how much she searched, her fingers couldn't find the herbs. "Did I put them in another pocket?" she thought, stopping to thoroughly check all her pockets. But the herbs were nowhere to be found. No, she realized, her heart sinking. She must have dropped them somewhere. When could that have happened? When the bees were chasing her? When she fell? When she passed through the bushes? There were so many possible moments. Fern felt utterly hopeless. She had no energy or strength to turn back, so she simply trudged toward home with her heavy feet. Section. Heiter rose from the bed, touching his forehead. The fever had broken. His body, heavy like a sandbag before, was feeling much better now. There was still a slight discomfort in his throat, but the pain was gone. The cold seemed to have passed. He let out a sigh of relief without even realizing it. Good. Now he wouldn't have to worry about Fern anymore. Heiter stood up and arched his back. A satisfying crack came from his spine. The sun was setting outside. It was about the time Fern would be finishing her training. She would be coming home soon. He headed to the living room and turned on the light. Now that the cold was gone, he decided he should cook dinner for a change. His shaky fingers managed to make a decent stew. All that was left was to wait for Fern to return. Half an hour passed, then an hour, but Fern still hadn't come back. Heiter went outside, using his cane to make his way to the cliff where Fern often trained. But she was nowhere to be seen. He checked the river where she did laundry and the rocky meditation spot, but she was at none of her usual places. Where could she have gone? Heiter returned home, thinking that if she was much later, he'd have to organize a proper search. Just then, he heard a sound from the entryway. Hurrying to the living room, he found Fern standing there. Heiter let out a relieved sigh. "I was worried. Where have you been at this hour?" But then he noticed Fern's disheveled appearance. Her clothes were dirty with soil, and leaves were stuck in her hair. "What on earth happened? You look a mess. Is your cold better now?" Fern asked, her expression tense. Puzzled, Heiter answered, "Yes, as you can see, I'm fully recovered." "I see, I'm glad," Fern said in a weary voice, and then began explaining what had happened. How she had gone to search for the medicinal herbs, how she had gotten lost, and how she had ended up dropping the herbs. When she finished, Fern bowed her head deeply, the leaves in her hair fluttering to the floor. "Master Heiter," gripping the hem of her clothes tightly with both hands, Fern's childlike gesture was unusual for her normally mature demeanor. "I want to become stronger, faster." She spoke quietly but with conviction. "I want to grow up and be able to support you, Master Heiter." Heiter placed his hand gently on Fern's bowed head and gave it a comforting pat. "It's all right. You're doing wonderfully," he continued, caressing her head. as he felt the tension leave Fern's body. The lost herbs didn't really matter to Heiter. It wasn't because his cold had already passed. It was because Fern had already given him more than enough vitality to live. To change the somber mood, Heiter spoke up in a cheerful tone. "Now, you must be hungry, aren't you? Shall we have dinner?" "Yes." Fern looked up, her expression softening a bit. Section. Heiter's stew was simply delicious. The smooth potatoes and carrots filled Fern's empty stomach endlessly. Exhausted as she was, Fern moved her spoon eagerly. Glancing up, she met Heiter's gaze. He was watching her with a warm smile. "Is there something on her face?" "No, no. I'm just happy to see you eating so enthusiastically. For an old person, seeing a child enjoy their food is the most precious nourishment." Feeling a bit self-conscious, Fern found it slightly difficult to eat. But what she was more curious about was, "Are you not angry with me, Master Heiter? Angry? For lying to you and going far away? I must have worried you terribly." "Oh, that's no big deal. Since you've returned safely, there's no need for me to be angry." While feeling relieved, Fern also found herself wondering, does Master Heiter ever get angry at all? "Of course I do. When I was traveling, I'd get mad all the time." "Really? I can't believe it. Everyone back then was just hopeless, you see." Despite his words, Heiter seemed quite pleased. Fern couldn't help but smile in response. After finishing the stew, Heiter called Fern in a solemn tone. "If Fern ever goes on a journey in the future, it would be better to have companions with you. That's..." For a moment, a vague sense of unease stirred in Fern's chest. "Is it because I'm unreliable?" "No." Heiter smiled, as if reminiscing about the past. "It's because it's more fun to have someone with you." Hee hee. Fern realized Heiter was right. End of chapter 1.